It's starting to sprinkle a little bit, which is good, I guess. Forecast says it's supposed to rain between 1/2 and 3/4 of an inch overnight. It's been a little over a week since or right around a week since I finished the cistern. We could use the rain to get some water in it, so 1/2 inch would bring the cistern up quite a bit. Forecast says rain for the next week at least, but I don't know how much we're going to get. A lot of it's just 20-30%, which we had 20% yesterday and didn't get a drop. Anyway, ordinarily I wouldn't like the rain, but with the cisterns empty we could use quite a bit of rain to get it filled up. Now the project that I've been working towards here for a while is doing some maintenance on this pickup. The rear brakes are shot on it again. They've been grinding pretty good, and I got new brake discs, rotors. They've been here for a month, but I ordered new calipers for it over a month ago and they just got here a couple days ago. So I jacked the truck up and put it on jack stands, but the jack stands got sharp corners on the bottoms of them. They're all right on the concrete floors. I just got a wooden floor in here, and the jack stands have kind of sharp edges on them on 4 corners. Oh, there's a chance they might sink into the wood and everything get out of balance or something and fall off. So anyway, I found some, I think it's 3/16 inch sheet metal put underneath the one, and then I had another piece of that someplace, but I don't know where it went, so I went and got 4 of those angles that I'm going to use for the brackets for the timber posts on the warehouse and put underneath the other one. Now I can work on the brakes. That's the first thing I'm going to do is redo the brakes, and then you can see that rear bumper is in pretty rough shape. This truck is 15 years old in the salt area, and all that time I've tried to keep it out of it most of the time of the salt, but we have to launch the airplane and the boats a couple times, which gets it right down in the salt water. And then driving it, they're using salt water on the roads here to de-ice them. Well, I don't drive it very much here in the wintertime on the salt, but every little bit builds up. And then we drove it down south one winter with a camper on it and down through Nevada and Utah, and they salt the heck out of the roads down there in Utah. We actually drove it out on the Bonneville salt flats. I just stayed on the pavement there. I didn't drive it out on the salt, but then when I saw how much salt they were putting on the roads there, we might as well have driven out on the salt lake. But anyway, 15 years, and those bumpers are just kind of paper thin anymore, and that one is rotted out. Well, I've got a new bumper to put on. I've been kind of hesitating to do that because I know once I get into the bumper and start putting it on, I've got to probably have to drop the trailer hitch. Worried about getting into rust and stuff on that. I'm probably going to want to powder coat that and sandblast it and powder coat it or whatever. But anyhow, I've been hesitating to get into that, and plus they had the hanger all full of other things and stuff and didn't really have room to do it. So I'm going to change those brakes on the wheels first, and then we'll start working on that rear bumper. And once I get things redone back here on this end, then I got to turn it around and change the oil and probably pull the front wheels, hubs and stuff on and repack the bearings and stuff there. So anyway, that's my project now. I'm pretty much done flying for the spring, so I needed the truck for the spring to haul fuel for the airplane and stuff, and I think I'm pretty much done flying now for the spring, so shouldn't need the pickup for anything for a while. Anyway, I got that wheel off there. Actually, looking at that rotor, that doesn't look too bad. It must be the left one that's grinding, because the right one here is not so far. I have to look in the inside of it, but usually it's the right rear one that goes bad on these. I don't know why, but even talking to the parts people, that's the one that they sell the most of, is the right rear rotor and caliper. I had this part last year and swapped the pads around from inside to outside. If I just swapped them around, that'd extend the life of them. So instead of the one wearing out and starting to grind the rotor down, it extends the life of them. But well, I looked that over pretty good, and that outside pad still looks good. But once I got to looking at it, the inside pad is wore out and it's grinding right down into the rotor. but the calipers still work pretty good. I was able to move the pistons on those and they work pretty good, so I don't need new calipers on this side, but I do need to change the pads. That rotor is a little bit lumpy. If I had my lathe was big enough, I could stick it on there and true it up, but I've got new rotors for that, so I might as well use them. So anyway, I'll go ahead and take that caliper off there and the rotor off and everything, I guess, and go ahead and keep working on it. Well, I got the caliper loose. Getting some out hardly strong enough to do that anymore. I got to put those bolts in there pretty tight, and I got a long breaker bar I put on there. It was all I could do to get that one loose. Anyway, I got the caliper off. I've got it hanging from a piece of wire for the spring so it doesn't put tension on the rubber hose here for the feed for it. Well, you can see this outside pad is still hardly any wear left on it at all, but the inside pad is gone. And I swapped those around once. I should have done that again last summer, I guess. I should have swapped those around last summer and that would have prevented that. But for some reason, these things don't move. They're supposed to float and, you know, push in. When they push the inside caliper against it, it's supposed to float on these bolts right here and push the outside caliper in there tight too, and they don't always work like that. Let me see if that thing even works on there. I might have to. Yeah, those are working. Those are working. So rubbers are gone on those. Rubber seals on these bolts, and the bolts are, you coat those with grease so it slides back and forth in there. I think I've got new rubbers for those. I'll have to decide whether I want to do something with those or not. I hate to put the new calipers on there, because then I got to bleed the brakes. If I don't change the calipers, I don't have to change the brakes, or bleed the brakes, I should say. Let me think about that. I might go ahead and change those since I'm changing new rotors anyway and new pads. I might go ahead and change the calipers, bleed the brakes, and then I can take these calipers. I've got the stuff to rebuild them, and these would be easy to rebuild because the pistons are free in them. Anyway, the next step is take this rotor off, and that's got a keeper that I've got to take off that holds the rotor up there on. So I've got to go get something to take that keeper off with. I might be able to do it with this screwdriver. Oh yeah, there it comes. These are just pressed steel washers with fingers on them, kind of spring steel, and they just thread on there. Kind of sacrifice them getting them off there, but where you're someplace where you can't get new ones, and a lot of these older cars and stuff that have been cars have been changed don't have the keepers on them anymore. So the rotors just flop in the breeze until you put the tire on and tighten the tire on. Well, it might be okay on the front, but back here on the back where you've got the parking brakes in there, that's not necessarily a good thing. Another one in there. Must be another one on there. Oh yeah, there it is. Now, we'll get to see how the parking brakes are. Okay, they're still in good shape. So this gets to be a mess here in the parking brake because that moisture and stuff gets held up in there, and they don't move very much, so they get froze up and crudded up, and of course, you know, all the rust and everything from the salt water. I took these all apart and cleaned them up and rebuilt them here, sandblasted them and powder coated them here a few years ago, and put new shoes on there and stuff. I was afraid that maybe they getting bad again, so it's actually cheaper to buy the whole backing plate and everything with the parking brake mounted on it than it is to fool with the parking brake and all of the parts, the springs and everything that go in here and all of that stuff. You can just buy the whole doggone thing and change it out. So I've got new parking brake setups there for those, but it doesn't look like I need them on this side. I can just put the new rotor on there and be good with that. So that's what I'm going to do, and I've already said that I'm going to take this off of there. So I got to get a wrench for that, clean that block up, clean that up around there so I don't get any dirt in that banjo fitting. And get a wrench and take that off of there. So that's the banjo fitting there that goes into the brake caliper. Anyway, I put the new rotor on there and calipers and pads on there, and be good to go again for another year. So that's ready to go. We need to bleed the brakes on this now. But I guess it don't hurt to run new brake fluid through that thing. I want to spray this down with some brake cleaner again. I sprayed it once and you can see that it got stuff coming off of it, oil, crud on it.
Need the brake?
No, I got to do the other side yet.
Oh, okay.
Alright, that makes sure all the assembly oil, protective oil and stuff like that is off that caliper and off of the rotor. That's the best caliper I've got in a long time. I replace these about every 3 or 4 years. And that's the best looking one that I've got in a long time. It came with all of the parts. Now the brake shoes themselves came with clips and stuff that hold them in, but this caliper came with those too. They almost always come with these little copper crush washers that you put in there to seal the brake fluid going into the caliper. And so this one came with 2 new gaskets, crush gaskets for that, but it also came with a new banjo bolt. That's the old banjo bolt. I've had a heck of a time finding the right size banjo bolts for these things sometimes if one of them gets boogered up. Well, this set of calipers came right with them, so that's a good deal. I'm not going to put the tire back on yet, as it's easier to get in here to bleed the brakes with it open like this. We'll get that done first and then I'll go ahead and put the tires back on. But there's the right side done. Now we'll switch around and do the left side. This rotor is paper thin on the inside. This is the one that was grinding. Well, we got to take that one off of there and replace it. I'll have to get underneath there and break those bolts loose and stuff. Take that caliper off there. Change out that caliper too.
Sandwich and water.
Alright, thank you. Well, usually it's the right brake and the right wheel and stuff that gets all messed up with the rust and the crud, but man, this one is crudded up. There's big chunks of sandy, gritty, grip, nasty stuff. And the bolts are all rusted up in there. There's some more crap there. Look at that. That's part of the brake pads mixed in with the mud and stuff. I don't know why that's like that. Anyway, that's really nasty. So I can't get the banjo bolt loose. I'm going to have to go get something to break that bolt loose with. Oh yeah, the brakes. This side's messed up. The parking brake is all gone. See how thin that is on that inside of that rotor. So this one's going to take a little bit more work. This one, like I said, the parking brake is foobarred on it. See what I can do about plugging off that brake line there so we don't drip a big puddle underneath there like we did on the other side. Alright, I gotta take a break here now. Gotta figure out what I'm gonna do. I might have to pull this hub off of there to get that brake pad. I think I do have to pull that hub off of there to get that backing plate and stuff off of there. Okay, well, time for cogitation and contemplation. Looking at this parking brake assembly, I could just replace the shoes on here, I guess. I've already taken this thing apart once, cleaned it all up, and powder coated it, rebuilt it and everything, and done that, put new shoes and everything on it. And this backing plate here was getting pretty thin in places. I did a lot of work on it, sandblasting it and stuff like that, and powder coating it. So it's bad again now, not too good again now, not as bad as it was. Well, I can see, yeah, there's stuff flaked off inside there. Well, anyway, the shoes are wore out. The shoe is wore out on this rear one, and the front one's down pretty good. So when I did that the last time, I got to looking. By the time you buy the shoes and all the paraphernalia and stuff to do that, you can buy the whole thing here. The whole thing, all brand new. Got all brand new parts in it. The backing plate's all brand new. The hanger, this cooling plate, whatever this is, shield, and everything's all brand new and it all put together. It's got the studs in it and everything. It's got this heavy casting that the main brake hooks onto. It's got the rubbers in here. I had a heck of a time finding this rubber seal to go in here. So any way you can get the whole doggone works for less than you can buy the individual parts made in China, which probably doesn't make any difference. Almost everything's made in China anymore. Other drum brakes, you remember the good old days of drum brakes, you had the right hand and left hand side, but this one's both the same. It's upside down on this side. This is the brake actuator down here that goes on the bottom, and the adjuster here goes on the top. On the right, on the left side, on the right side it's just the opposite. Not a heck of a lot of shoe on there on those, on the shoes, not a whole lot of friction on there, but it's just a parking brake anyway, it's not a brake. So that's the plan now, is to go ahead and change that thing out. But that thing is too big to slip over this hub, so I have to pull this hub. So first thing I've got to do is take these axle bolts out and pull the axle, and then I take the nut out from the inside. I have to see if I still got that tool that I made. So anyway, that's the plan, Stan. That's what I got to do now, is take this axle out, pull the hub off, and then I can take this brake hanger off of there, replace it, and then put everything back together. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jack this truck up again and raise this side up higher than the other side a little bit, so the gear grease in the differential and the axle will all flow down away from this side, so I don't have to worry about gear grease leaking out of this side. You never know on these doggone things whether you got metric or SAE. Put some sawdust down there. One good thing about having wooden floors, they absorb all the crap, all the fluids pretty good, but we got lots of sawdust. Instead of having a snap ring, it's got a kind of a spring clip around there to hold that nut in place, so we got to take that off of there. Get it with just regular pliers. Oh yeah, there it came. Got a burr on the threads there. There we go. That bearing's still good. Everything looks good on there. Wonder if that brake cable still works or if it froze up. I made sure and cleaned it up and sprayed lube down in that brake cable when we had it apart last time, but things take a beating here. 15 years old in this weather and salt and air and everything. It all takes a beating, so now I got to figure out and remember which wrenches, because there was wrenches that I used on there to get those nuts off of there, and if I remember right, it wasn't exactly easy. I don't remember. I think they take like a 22 millimeter or something like that, but I can't remember, so we'll have to figure that out. But that's the next step. I know there was some of those you could just barely get a wrench in on. You couldn't use the air wrench or anything to get them off. So let's see what we can do. Well, I got two of those nuts off of there. I have to come around this side to get the other two. I might not be able to get one of them. I don't remember. It seems like I couldn't get all of them with a socket. I had used an open end wrench on some of them, but I can't remember now. But we'll figure that out here in a minute. Here, get something to lay on. So that was a 24 millimeter socket, or a 15/16 socket that fit on those. I don't have a 24 millimeter wrench, but I got a 15/16. We'll see if we can get that off of there. Oh, I'm gonna have to get a cheater on that. All right, I got a wrench to use for a cheater, but I didn't think about this. I've got this long breaker bar. Let's see if that will fit in there with a socket. Yeah, I can fit that on there with a socket. I remember now, that's what I did before. I just couldn't take it all the way off because the breaker bar runs into the axle there. So I loosened that up. Now I should be able to get it off. Yeah, now I can get it off. All right, that worked. All right, so now we got to get the brake cable off of here, the emergency brake cable, parking brake cable. All right, I got that off of there. Took some doing. What you got, the cable right here, and it's got kind of a, there we go, duckbill end on it here that slips down into this eye right here on the actuator arm for the brakes, and you can't get that apart until you take the cable loose from the anchor point. Well, the anchor point has got an eye in it right here and a slit in the top, and this has got a collar right here. It's got fingers on it. This collar slides through this anchor point right here, and then those fingers stick up and keep it from backing up through there. So you got to get those fingers down to get that to slide through, so you can get the cable to slide up through here. But the spring goes into this collar right here, so you've got to get that spring pulled back to expose enough of the cable to get it to slide up through here. And that was a pain to do. So the end of this spring was kind of froze up a little bit together, but I got a big pair of dikes and I'd stuck down in there and kind of broke it loose and kept pulling it this way, and I finally got it pulled over enough that I could get a pair of needle nose, let's see, there we go, needle nose vice grips in there and clamp down, so they didn't clamp down on the cable underneath, but it supported the spring from the backside, and then I was able to pull the spring this way far enough to compress it to get the cable exposed so I could get it up through this notch right here. So that was kind of a pain. And then I took that and exposed that cable, and I took some penetrating fluid and sprayed on the cable And I checked the cable. I applied the brakes 2 or 3 times, and the cable and the brake works. The cable works. It's starting to get kind of crusty, so it'd probably be a good idea to go ahead and replace that sometime in the future. But for now, it's okay. So now I'll clean this up around here. You just need to make sure most of the dirt is off there. This face is cleaned up pretty good. What did I do with my wire brush? So let me clean this up a little bit more. So the first thing to do, let me see here. It's supposed to go under or over. I think that was under. So the first thing to do is to get that end through the hole there on the actuator. And now we've got to there we go. There we go. And now that just goes through there like that. There we go. Now I gotta get those tabs up and turned around to where they lock onto that thing there. There it went. All right. There it went into its slot. It went all the way into that. Now there's a collar on that right there, and it wasn't going into that slot all the way. So now I got to get something to bend these fingers up. They're already kind of sprung up, so that they don't. Yeah, that works. They're already sprung up, so that's on there. That's good. Okay, that's good. Now this just goes on there like that. And we put the nuts back on it. See? That was a heck of a lot easier than taking this whole thing all apart and sandblasting it all up and splitting it here and cleaning it all up and powder coating and all that. Well, there we go. Brand new brake hanger. Shield, brake shoes, whole brake assembly and everything's all brand new and ready to operate. Now if I hadn't been so careless taking that hub off there and dropping it down into the sawdust, I could have just slid it right back on there and put it all back together, but I probably wouldn't have done that anyway. I'll take those bearings out of there, wash them and clean them and pre-pack them. And I've got to make a new gasket for the axle where it bolts into the hub in the front. So that's where we go from here. We'll go get those things cleaned up. I got that hub all cleaned up. I got to make a gasket for it to go for that axle, where it goes in there. And the easiest way I know to do that, I could go ahead and draw up a pattern and stuff on the computer and make one with my printer. A laser printer, cut one out, a nice neat one out with that. But this is the way my dad taught me how to do it 60 years ago. Okay, there's a gasket. Ain't as pretty as what you'd cut out with a laser cutter, but it'll work. Now everything's all cleaned up and ready to go back together. So this is what we used to call a floating hub. I don't know whether that was a technical name or not, but that's kind of what we used to call them all the time, as a floating hub. And that means that the bearings float in an oil bath instead of being packed with grease like front wheel bearings and stuff were. So the oil comes through the hub, or through the axle housing and into the hub and lubricates these bearings like that. But I like to pre-lube these bearings a little bit so they're not running dry until the oil runs in there and they get to spinning and stuff, because even when it gets set down on the ground level, if the oil runs in there, it'll only go in on the lower portion of the bearings, and the upper portions of the bearings will stay dry until it starts rotating enough that the bearings pick the oil up and start start bringing it around. So I'm using AMSOIL synthetic oil in the differential. So I got some AMSOIL synthetic grease to use that's compatible with the oil in the differential, the gear grease, gear oil. So I'm just going to go ahead and pack these bearings with this, and that'll pre-lube these bearings. Now ordinarily what I do is pack these bearings heavy and pack grease in the axle housing itself and make sure it's all packed around there good and tight. But I don't want to do it too tight here, because we want the oil to be able to run in through here, the gear oil. We want it to be able to run in through there and wash in there and cover this up. So basically I'm just doing this just enough to coat these bearings with oil until the gear oil can take over. Alright, I got the hub put on there, and both the inner and outer bearings put on there. So the next thing to do is to put the axle nut on there. This holds the bearing in, pushes the bearing in. Now I've done this 100 times, and a lot of times in the early days just did it with a chisel and a hammer to get the nuts on and off, which of course is the wrong way to do it, but that's the way you do it when you don't have the right tools to do things with. I've done it 50 or 100 times with this socket here. This works on my old power wagons and on a whole bunch of other trucks that I've worked on, but that won't work on here. So I made a special socket to fit in here when I had those rear ends apart. I can't find it now. I went and looked. This is the socket that I bought to use on the front end, on the nuts on the front end, but that won't work here on this. So I'm going to go put this on for now, finger tight, or as tight as I can get it without a proper tool, and then I got to go look and see if I can find the tool that I made to do that with, to torque that down or to tighten that up. I've got to tighten it up enough to preload the bearings. Well, I actually got that on there tight enough by just using a pair of needle nose pliers and my wooden mallet. What I did is I slid that up on there, of course, before I put this front bearing in, and then I tapped it in with the wooden mallet to try to get that seal to start up on the seat for the seal. And then I put the front bearing in. I went ahead and screwed that nut on there as far as I could with my fingers, and then I just started working it and taking this pair of needle nose pliers and sticking it in those holes right there, and used it like a spanner and just turned it. And then I would turn the hub back and forth, tap on it with the hammer to get it to seat in there, and I just kept doing that until I couldn't get that nut to turn anymore. And then I could just barely get this hub to rotate, which I knew was was too much preload on it. So I backed it off. This nut has grooves cut in it for a key, and there's a keyway cut into the axle hub, that shaft right here, or actually into the housing, axle housing. So I had that tightened up. There was a notch right here that was lined up with that, but that was too tight, so I backed it off one notch. Oh, there's the key. I was wondering what I did with that. I'll put the key in there. And then I got this little spring keeper that goes in there. I don't know which way that goes or if it makes any difference which way it goes. There we go. That should do it. And the good old days, what they'd do is they'd have a washer that would go around with a tab that would go down into this key, and then another tab or a top piece that you would bend over either into another tab or onto the flat so that it couldn't back off. Okay, I'll put the axle back in it now. Bolts were a little bit crusty on the outside. The inside, the threads were still pretty good. They were a little bit crusty out here on the outside, so took them over to the shop, run them through the wire wheel, cleaned them up a little bit. I'll go ahead and put a little bit of thread lock on them. They had thread lock on them before, this yellow stuff, but it's not the high strength stuff. I don't want to have to use special tools and heat to get this thing apart the next time. I didn't use thread lock on them the last time I had them apart. This side was okay, but the bolts on the other side backed out and started leaking just a little bit. Well, I thought I'd go ahead and put a little bit on it this time. Now I can fit the rotor on there and see how much the brakes need to be adjusted out for the parking brake. Okay. Okay, it's too far. Well, that's good. A little bit more off of it. Alright, that should be good. The left side is all together. Looks as good as new or better. Brand new brake hanger assembly with the parking brake and everything on it. Calipers, rotor. I need to bleed these brakes, but otherwise that's all up in shape. So both the right and left side have new brakes on them, new calipers and rotors. The right side I didn't need to do anything with the parking brake or the brake hanger. So now this thing could go back together. I could put the wheels and tires back on here and it'd be good to go. I think I'm going to leave it right now the way it is, sitting on the jack stands, and start working on that rear bumper.